When one makes of a person what the world has made with South Africa's Mandela, iconize him, almost deify him, raise him up so high that he seems unreachable, untouchable, then one can admire him, one can stand in awe of him, one can even adore him, but one cannot really emulate him. He is just too far away. The bar has been set too high. But we must learn from Nelson Mandela every generation anew so that we can preserve humanity in this world. Now, my generation did not know Mandela. He was away in prison for 27 years. But we knew of him. We knew of his work in the Defiance campaign. We knew of the treason trial. And we knew of the Rivonia trial. We knew how he dedicated his life to the struggle for freedom and justice, not just for black people, but for all of South Africa's people. We knew how he was willing to stake his life on what he believed, those ideals that he strove for, a free and genuine and non-racial democracy in which everyone would play their part. But they called him a traitor, they called him a terrorist, and they put him on trial, and they sent him to Robben Island prison for 27 years. But we knew also that he had left a charge for the new generation, and he said, the new generation must not turn back, we must not give up, we must continue the struggle until that South Africa that he fought for would come into being. And the generation of 1976 did just that. But we had to learn that there's no struggle without sacrifice, that there's no victory without pain, that there's no light at the end of the tunnel if you're not willing to go through the darkness. And so we find ourselves locked in deadly battle with the apartheid regime. Our townships were besieged, our streets became war zones, our school grounds became battlefields. We went from funeral to funeral as our children were massacred. Our anger rose to the heavens as we saw what the South African government was actually willing to do, the extent to which they are willing to go just to maintain white privilege and white power and apartheid. We knew that this was going to be an immensely difficult struggle, and it was. We tried to articulate our anger, to articulate our hope amidst of the pain. We tried to say to the people, somewhere there's a bright light that shines, and we must not rest until we find it. So the day when Nelson Mandela was released from prison, it was a day of great joy, and we asked ourselves, how shall we take this moment into the future for all our people? But in all honesty, we had to battle with another question as well. What shall we do with our anger and our rage at 350 years of oppression and humiliation and dehumanization? Shall Mandela, who had gone through 27 years on Robben Island, understand our rage, and will he come and lead us in this new struggle just to help us turn the tables? He whose health had been damaged so much by the labor that he had to do on the island. He who could not touch his wife's hands for 20 years while he was on that prison. He who suffered so much, will he understand? When he came out of prison, though, Mandela spoke a different language to us. He told us that the road to freedom was long and that we could not find sustenance in bitterness and in anger and in a lust for revenge. We had to find something else because those were not the proper companions for such a new journey into a new future. Rather, he said, we should find companionship in reconciliation and in forgiveness in building communities of justice and peace and trust and friendship. That is what we had to do. Nelson Mandela told us that we must remember that we cannot live without forgiveness. So he set the example. He forgave his jailer, explaining to him that he understood that he was only doing his job. He turned the politics of enmity into the politics of trust and friendship. He forgave the people who became the embodiment of apartheid. He forgave the prosecutor who sent him to prison 27 years ago. Mandela taught us that even if you go out of prison and you take with you bitterness and hatred and a desire for retribution, you will never be free. You will stay in a prison of your own making. He taught us that we should invest our resilience not in ourselves, but in the redemption of a whole nation. And he found that redemption in the children. He said that being an icon in the world is not nearly as important as being trusted by the children, as being responsible to the children, as being accountable to the children, as being loved by the children. Nelson Mandela taught us all of that. He taught us that strength is in the open hand of friendship and vulnerability, that the future is in the open face of hope that is shining towards that future, that draws people towards you. Nelson Mandela made that possible because he wanted to create a different world. He wanted us to have a different kind of politics. Politics that were done as if people actually mattered and not just for self-interest. A different world where the scandalous and unsustainable gap between the rich and the poor would not just be no longer tolerated, but in fact eradicated. Nelson Mandela taught us that we should work for a different world where a young black man can actually walk down the streets of his hometown without fear that he'll be targeted and shot to death. A different world where those with a different sexual orientation would no longer hide in the shadows, but would come and be embraced, no longer targeted and despised and stigmatized and killed and hunted down. A different world where all our people would see ourselves in our diversity together. We would celebrate that and we would embrace that. A different world is what Mandela worked for, is what Mandela wanted, is what Mandela leave to us. As he spoke to the young people in South Africa and across the world, he said, "Soon I will be gone. My work is done. It is in your hands now. It is in your hands now. It is in your hands now." And yes, it is. Thank you, and God bless you.